All right, well, welcome. Appreciate everybody coming. I want to let everybody know this is not an EV or hydrogen workshop. We're talking nat gas here today, so make sure you're in the right spot. My name's Eric Bippus. I'm Senior Vice President of Sales and Marketing for Hexagon Agility. Super excited to be here. Thank you to G&A for putting this event on. It's been great. Over 8,000 people here this week. Really, really astonishing. The show floor has been great. A lot of new technology, super excited about. But the focus of today's conversation is going to be around compressed natural gas solutions, the technology that's in place, renewable, and biomethane. We've got a great panel to talk to you about it. Okay. So our goal today is what we really want to do is have an open dialogue. I'll be taking questions that we'll be able to field from you, from the audience. So if you have the app, please use that to send the questions up. We got a great panel put together here today. I've had a chance to meet all of these individuals and get to know them. First is Dave Bolderoff, comes from LA County Sanitation. Really a great experience from a natural gas standpoint, but a very mixed fleet, over 1,100 vehicles in his fleet. But he's also a producer of renewable natural gas, so they have a lot of wastewater management facilities, landfills, where they're tapping that renewable natural gas, actually processing it, and then they have a filling station that they sell gas to the public. So really a unique operation. Very few of them like that in the country. Look forward to hear what he has to say. Thomas Healy from Hyliion is the founder and CEO of Hyliion, a very unique product that really aligns well with what we believe is a solution for compressed natural gas, renewable natural gas, but also full BEV solutions, hybrid hydrogen solutions, really some cutting edge technology. Thomas is a long-time gearhead. He loves tinkering. He's got several patents out, I think 5 automotive patents he has, but he's got a real passion for this industry. And then Tom Swenson, who's, Tom's been around forever on the Cummins side of the business here in California. Gotten to know Tom over the years. He started out in the California Energy Commission and then made his way into Westport, and now is with Cummins on their global regulatory affairs department. But he's been a big help, been very collaborative in the industry, and been a real champion of clean air, and we're excited to hear what Cummins has to say. Okay, with that, I'm going to jump right into it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Hexagon and what we do as a business. Hexagon is a group of companies. Where I come from, I represent Hexagon Agility, which is the natural gas space, the G mobility or low emission business of the Hexagon group. We also have Hexagon Purus on the right-hand margin you see there, which is a business that we own 75% of. They're focusing on zero emission solutions around BEV, as well as hydrogen solutions. And then we have 2 other businesses, Hexagon Digital Wave and Ragasco in the middle, offering different technology, Digital Wave around smart tank technology for this particular industry, and then Ragasco's in the LPG cylinder space. The 2 businesses that are really focused on what we do here today are Hexagon Agility and Hexagon Purus. And the focus of the energy that we contain is compressed natural gas, LPG, biomethane or renewable natural gas, BEV solutions, and then hydrogen solutions. When we look at the energy sources, if you came to our booth yesterday, we had a press conference. We were very excited to announce our investment in a company called CryoShelter out of Austria, which really fills out our portfolio. So our DNA is storing energy for the commercial vehicle space, whether that be in a Type 4 pressure vessel from 200 bar or 3,000 PSI, right on up to 10,000 PSI in hydrogen applications. Now we've added cryogenic storage of liquid hydrogen and liquid natural gas through the CryoShelter investment. We also have on the pure side, our electrical solutions. So when you look at what we're going to talk about today, this is really what's available. This is the energy sources that are available to contain and put through either an ICE engine or a fuel cell or pure electric drivetrain. Now, that's not everything. We've got some really, really leaning forward stuff that we're doing at Hexagon. We're talking to Stark Industries. We all know the Avengers, right? So Iron Man's power source, we're negotiating with them. They have some great IP around that. Todd Sloan from Purus is handling that negotiation. So we're trying to get that so we can package that into a Class 8 truck. And then we're talking to some little green guys up on planet Uranus looking for their infinite power crystals that they have, package that as well. So pretty excited about that, but that's still way out there. We're going to stick in reality of today, which is really just these solutions. So the call to immediacy and urgency that we have right now, back in November 2021, all the global leaders, 111 countries came together for COP26 in the UK. And they all committed to not only committing to the Paris Climate Accords of 2050, but really taking a look at 2030 and 2025 and creating some milestones to say, we need to improve emission targets by these milestones. And that 2031 sticks out there. It seems like a long way away when we're talking about it, but it's really 8 years away, and there's an immediacy around that. So as we look at what our topic is today, and that's heavy-duty transportation, in North America, there's typically in a non-COVID year, 350,000 heavy-duty vehicles that are sold into the marketplace. And knowing that we have targets in 2030 that we have to hit, as we stand today, 97% of those are still diesel, a very high carbon fuel emitting a significant amount of CI into the atmosphere. There's a huge sense of urgency of really taking a look at that heavy duty space and saying, if we're going to hit those 2030 targets, we need mass adoption and we need it now. We don't need it to start very slowly now and trickle up to 2027, 2028. We need a step function change. And what we'll talk to you about today, we do believe that we have the ability to have a step function change to start that path towards clean heavy duty transportation. So these are just, I pulled these from this morning. None of these are over 2 days old. These are just some headlines on the electrical grid here in California, but what's even worse, you see down now, they're talking about the electrical shortage that we're going to have for the grid in California. It could extend through 2025. And that's before heavy duty vehicles and more passenger cars come into the grid. And what's really disturbing for me is the Wall Street Journal announced yesterday that not only is it going to impact Texas and California, but Indiana, where I come from, which really sucks because that means in August I got to turn my air conditioner off because we're going to have grid issues. So that's a problem. I want to fix this really bad because it's 98% humidity there. So we shared this yesterday. Tom and our Ashley Remillard shared this at a press conference they had in the Cummins booth. And it's Carb's announcement of taking a look at 2021 emissions for the heavy duty transport sector. By far the cleanest was renewable natural gas or natural gas in the California grid, which is 98% renewable natural gas. It's actually a negative carbon intensity score of 33.4 versus electric, diesel, and biodiesel. When you look at the rest of the United States, what's in the grid is roughly 64% renewable natural gas. So that's moving towards 100%. So when you look at that heavy duty sector and we talk about some of the solutions that we have today, think about this negative carbon intensity score. Okay, last slide. I'm going to turn it over to my speakers to come up and introduce themselves, their company, and what they're doing, and then we'll open up to questions and answer. This is a study that was done about a year ago, and it was a mix of different companies, OEMs in Europe, as well as some of in the energy industry. And they said, if you forgot about regulation and you took a look at the heavy duty space and the vehicle sector, and said, going out to 2050, what do you see as the ideal solutions for the vehicle space? Their conclusion was that roughly 20% of the industry, even out to 2050, is going to require ICE engines. Now, burning clean fuel, burning renewable natural gas, biomethane, potentially hydrogen, but that the ICE for those long haul, high payload applications has a very, very long life potential. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave Bolderoff, who's actually in Aussie. I expect him to come up here and say good day. Dave.
Thanks, Eric, and good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's enjoying the various sessions over the last couple of days and had really a good time seeing all the new technology on the shop floor. So just a little bit about me and here we go. The company I work for. My name's Dave Bolderoff. I'm with Los Angeles County Sanitation Districts. We're based here in Los Angeles County. We're a special district that manages both wastewater and solid waste assets. So we don't do any collection, a common mistake with LA Sanitation, a city-run organization. So we manage post-collection activities, being solid waste landfills, transfer stations, material recovery facilities, as well as compost facilities. And then on a wastewater side, we manage some large wastewater treatment facilities. The largest facility is about 10 miles north of here in Carson. A lot of pumping plants, as well as about 2,000 miles of sewer lines. But our main mission is to take this waste that's generated here in LA County and convert it to renewable resources, which is things like recycled water, recycled commodities that we pull out of the waste stream, as well as green energy. So we grab a lot of that and harvest a lot of that natural gas that's created from the generation or degeneration of that waste, being from our landfills as well as our water treatment facilities with our digesters. So there's been a lot of talk about carbon neutrality and what's everyone's goal is to reduce their carbon footprint going forward. I think everyone agrees that this is the subject matter of the moment, and there's a lot of different talks and conversations about how to get there. I think a lot of people come out with bold statements, large companies, about being carbon neutral by 2035, 2040, or 2050 even. And maybe they haven't developed that plan, but they've got that overall goal. I really hate to brag and tell you how good we are, but actually we're actually carbon neutral today, which I'm very proud of, to work for an organization that's carbon neutral today. We actually had our 2021 numbers audited by a third party. So in our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, we're carbon negative as we are today. So that's pretty exciting to work for an organization with 1,700 employees that manage a lot of the waste generated here in Los Angeles to be carbon negative through everything we do to kind of reuse our waste resources. And a big part of that is the production and use of that renewable natural gas into our vehicles today. So this is kind of a bit of a snapshot of some of the vehicles we have in our fleet today that run on renewable natural gas. We've got about 90 in our fleet today. It's not a total composition, but we plan to potentially double that in as little as 5 or 6 years. We don't do any collection trucks, but we do a lot of transfer. So we have a lot of truck tractors on the heavy duty side. We've got vacuum jetter trucks that clean our sewer systems. And then on the medium duty side, we've got a lot of utility body trucks, and we've got a couple on the light duty side as well. And we're also really pushing not only our own fleet to transition to renewable natural gas, but we're really building this into our contracts going forward. So, our contract haulers that assist us hauling waste to various facilities, they're obligated now to run renewable natural gas. So not only at the 90 vehicles that we've got our own fleet, we've got somewhere in the range of 70 of our contract haulers running heavy duty trucks running on renewable natural gas as well. So one of the problems with implementing this, we've been at this, since the late 90s, actually, when we first started testing with renewable natural gas. And so that's about 25 years of experiences, and we had a lot of growing pains along that road to get there. So, but today these trucks are readily available, and we've had a lot of issues with implementing them in various parts of our fleet. And I just wanted to highlight on one example here was our wastewater collection systems that manage our sewer lines. So they're required to do emergency response whenever there's a sewer overflow, they're expected to respond to that. So they're very hesitant changing over to a new vehicle fuel because, you know, it impacted their ability to respond to that emergency. So, you know, we started off with this group transitioning to heavy duty trucks that had this vacuum jet sewer cleaning system on them. They're about $500,000 a truck. We started that in 2016, or 2015, sorry. So about 7 years ago, we started with the first truck, and they're always adamant at the time they'd still need a couple of diesel trucks just in case. But, you know, September last year, so a little over 6 months ago, we transitioned the last truck in that group to renewable natural gas. So that was a big achievement for us. You know, we kind of broke down those barriers. They agreed that it worked, you know, over that 7 years of testing and experience they've had. And funny enough, shortly thereafter, it was between Christmas and New Year's, we had our first major sewer overflow in the city of Carson here, about 10 miles north of here, just off the 110 freeway. So a very unfortunate incident that we had a sewer overflow. We really try and stop those things from happening. But in doing so, this group was able to respond around the clock to divert that flow and clean up the mess from that sewer overflow with renewable natural gas trucks. So they work in these difficult circumstances. We've proved that here in Los Angeles County. So on the infrastructure side, we continue to spend. We're very heavy and pro natural gas, you know, because we created ourselves. But, you know, we spent about $3.5 million in the last 24 months upgrading facilities, adding new facilities. And we've also, you know, committed to spend another $3.5 million in the next 12 months upgrading further facilities. So we continue to invest in new infrastructure and build out our network here in LA County. Most of these we're trying to make available to the public as well, to provide that asset to the public so that they can convert their fleets, smaller fleets that maybe don't have the luxury of investing in their own infrastructure. They could, you know, utilize our stations. I also like to point out, we've also kind of trialed different things like the GoFlow ICE engine here that runs on natural gas that can compress natural gas for the use of natural gas vehicles. Buying systems like this can get stations up relatively quickly, inexpensively, and kind of mitigate some of the planning and requirements there for permits to get these stations up and going. So we've been very successful there. So we've got stations that produce over 3,000 GGE per day, and then we've got other stations that maybe only use 200 GGE per day. So we've got the full mix there, and we kind of designed that station for its use. And one other thing I really want to kind of excited to talk to you about today was, you know, just other ways we're looking to grab or other sources of renewable natural gas. So, you know, in the state of California at the moment, there's a real drive to keep organics out of landfills. So 3 years ago, we started collecting these at one of our material recovery facilities. All the food waste generated from restaurants or grocery stores that, you know, was deemed surplus or, you know, waste is delivered to our material recovery facility in the city of Whittier here. We kind of collect that, put it through this machine you can see on the right-hand side there, which is a bioseparator that, you know, creates, you know, that liquid into a pumpable slurry. I know some of you guys might be familiar with Back to the Future and how they threw that banana peel to create the DeLorean to travel in time. You know, we're doing something very similar today, just on a larger scale. So as that waste is, like I said, put into a pumpable slurry, we're able to transport that about 25 miles away to our digesters that we already have in service for our wastewater treatment plants. So we inject that into our digesters, and through the AD process, we're able to create more biogas to use as vehicle fuel. At that facility, we also have a total energy facility. So we have the luxury of putting that into electricity and powering the plant itself, or putting that onto the grid. And now more recently, in 2020, we built a biogas conditioning system, that can kind of scrub that gas, take the siloxanes and the VOCs out of that biogas and convert it to renewable natural gas for use of vehicles. So here you can see some of the infrastructure we had to install recently to get that to a vehicle grade fuel. And currently we're producing about 1,300 GGE per day out of that facility, and we have plans in the near term to ramp that up to 3,000, and we have the capacity to increase that to 9,500 in the kind of short to medium term there. So there is renewable natural gas locally, and I think that's what we're seeing, a trend of grabbing that locally rather than transmitting it, you know, through interstate lines. So that's a little bit about my organization, and I want to pass it next to Tom Healy with Hyliion.
Thanks, Dave.
All right, well, I'll start off with apologizing, because if anyone showed up at this room just reading the title and you said, oh, natural gas, this is like probably the one room I can go to in this whole expo that we're not going to talk about electric, I'm the one here to talk about electric. So with that, our whole pitch, our whole philosophy is, how do we bring electrification forward, but actually do it in a practical way, right? We saw, a lot of examples just in the last couple of minutes here about how there's a lot of really innovative, unique ideas out there that where we all want to get to in the future, but the reality is a long ways away. And so we got to look at this as a innovative yet practical way in order to get to electrification. So a little bit of background on us as an organization. So our mission is to become the leading provider of electrified powertrain solutions for the commercial vehicle space. But as we look at this problem, there are a few things you need to consider. Yeah, we all want to go electrify. That makes sense. But how are we actually going to do this? What infrastructure is out there? How are we going to reduce emissions? And ultimately, can we do this in a way where it's cost competitive for fleets to actually make this shift? So those are the three things I want you all to kind of keep in mind as I go through our overview. It comes down to cost, emissions, and infrastructure. A little background on us as an organization. We are based in Austin, Texas, a startup at heart. I founded Hyliion about 7 years ago now. We went public about a year ago, and through that transaction, had a very successful raised about $700 million in capital to continue down this journey. And ultimately, our goal is to go after the long-haul, over-the-road trucking space with innovative yet practical powertrain solutions. So this is an example of our Hypertruck ERX, electric drive vehicle. But as opposed to needing to recharge off the grid and having to plug the vehicle in, we actually bring a generator with the vehicle so that we charge the vehicle as it's going down the road. So you don't need the grid anymore. You just bring your power plant with you and you charge as you go. A lot of big benefits come from this. A lot of the hurdles that are often faced with electrification, when you start thinking about, well, what's the range of the vehicle? How many chargers are actually out there? These are things that we can overcome by bringing the power plant with the vehicle and ultimately leveraging natural gas to start as the fuel on board the truck in order to recharge the batteries. So to put some stats to it, ultimately you can, over a lifetime ownership of this vehicle, you can drive a lower cost of ownership than a diesel truck, which is usually a pretty difficult challenge for electric vehicles to hit. Second is the range of the vehicle. You're not being compromised like a normal electric truck. We're able to achieve a 1,000-mile range off of this vehicle because it's charging the batteries as you go. With that, we also have 75 miles of just BEV range. So if you think about when a truck's going into city limits, you can actually turn that generator off, have no tailpipe emissions at all, make your deliveries, and then when you go leave that city, you kick the generator back on and you charge as you're driving. From a payload capacity, a driver performance standpoint, you're also seeing actually more horsepower, more torque than a conventional diesel truck. And then the last bullet, which is probably the biggest differentiator, or one of them, is we're leveraging the existing natural gas stations that are already out there, which, as many of you know, it's about 700 public stations already in existence today. So to break down the electric landscape a little bit more, we see it kind of breaking into two different buckets. We see short haul, final mile, local delivery as being the first bucket, and then the second is over the road, long haul trucking. And we see this as kind of being the divide. Now, we could spend a lot of time arguing kind of where that fine line is, but at Hyliion, we think it's anywhere from that kind of 150 to 250 miles is where we're going to see, below that, local delivery, final mile, BEV plug-in makes a lot of sense. Leverage the grid for that, charge the vehicles at night. Once you get above that mileage, though, the weight, the cost of the batteries, and the demand that it puts on the grid. I mean, we already saw some examples of the grid as being overloaded. The charge rates that you need to have in order to keep those vehicles up and running are very, very difficult for the grid. And that's where we see range extender vehicles making the most sense. Now, we want to look at it, though, of not just where we are today, but also where we're heading in the future. So what our belief is let's start with natural gas today, renewable natural gas, great emissions benefits. We can use that to charge the batteries as we start. And then eventually we can evolve into a hydrogen-based future and use hydrogen fuel cells on board the truck to charge the batteries. Now, the neat thing for us is that the powertrain doesn't really change. The only thing that changes is the power plant or the generator under the hood. All right, so now let's put some stats to it of why this is the logical yet innovative way to get to electrification. So those three things I mentioned leading in, you start with cost, infrastructure, and then emissions. So on the cost side, you can see where hydrogen is today, where it's expected to get to in the future, where electricity is today, expected to get to in the future. And then with renewable natural gas, we're already at a significantly lower cost of fuel, even far lower than where diesel is today. We're seeing nat gas prices being about a third of what diesel is today. And then you compare that to hydrogen can be upwards of 3x what diesel costs are. So then infrastructure. As I mentioned before, there's over 700 stations already out there for nat gas, versus with hydrogen, we're basically starting from scratch of building out stations. There's a lot of efforts going towards it, but it's not there today. And then with electricity, we see a lot of effort of people trying to put in chargers, but I've probably heard more horror stories from trying to put in chargers than success stories, especially when you get into really high charge rate chargers. Some examples of fleets being like, look, I went to the utility provider and they said I could run 2 or 3 trucks plugged into the grid. Everything else needs to stay diesel because the grid just can't support those sort of charge rates. And then lastly is emissions, which I think this showed very similar to the slide we saw earlier of renewable natural gas is one of the only fuel sources that can actually drive you below zero and get you a net carbon negative solution. And this is the other aspect of infrastructure that sometimes gets forgotten is, well, how does the fuel or the electricity actually get into the truck? Well, with natural gas, we already have RNG production underway. There's just as many RNG production facilities being built out right now as there already are in existence. So conceptually, we're going to see about a doubling of RNG in the not too distant future. We already have pipelines set out for natural gas. And in order to install a nat gas station, it's relatively easy. You tap into the existing pipelines that are already there. When you start to look at BEV, conceptually, you think, oh, this should be really easy, right? I just take that electrical line that's coming into a warehouse and put a charger on it. Well, the problem is that charger or that line that's going into the building often can't support the demands that these vehicles are going to take. To put an actual example to that, we had a fleet that was looking at moving to BEV plug-in. Their utility provider, and this was in Texas, their utility provider quoted them $30 million for a build out for 50 trucks for BEV plug-in. And at that point, the fleet was like, look, this doesn't make sense. I can't do it. There's no way we can spend $30 million just on chargers for 50 trucks at one warehouse. And then lastly is hydrogen, which this actually is kind of a full tear up of the eco stream. You really need to start with, one, we need to start making green hydrogen. A lot of it's gray hydrogen. It's actually, in many instances, more pollutive than diesel trucks today. So we need to start making green hydrogen. Then you actually have to transport that hydrogen in a truck in order to get it to the station, and we need to build out the station. So will we get there? Hopefully. On what time frame? I don't think any of us in this room can really answer that. Hydrogen's been the fuel that's been a decade away for the last 3 or more decades. So we still have some time till we're going to be at a hydrogen-based future, and we should be leveraging what's available to us today to make a really positive impact. And that brings us to the last slide here, which is our roadmap of how to roll out electrification for the long haul space. So start with an internal combustion engine, driving a natural gas engine, producing electricity on board the vehicle to charge as you're going. Then eventually we are stepping into a fuel agnostic generator that can run on either hydrogen or nat gas. And we see this as a big differentiator because if you give fleets the flexibility that they can choose which fuel they want to use on the same vehicle platform, that's a huge win. And then eventually we'll get into a hydrogen fuel cell solution and just be a purely hydrogen-based vehicle. But this kind of ties it back to what I led in with, which is innovative yet practical on how we get to electrification. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thomas is way taller than I am, so I'm going to adjust this. So I just need to do a quick check here. Are there any mics in the room? You raise your hand. I know there's at least one. Okay, so I've done my mic check. We're good. I know it's not my day job. So welcome. I saw Sean duck in here earlier from GNA, and I was going to acknowledge what a successful program this has been all week, but then he ducked back out. So again, Tom Swenson, I'm with Cummins, and I'm going to cover the engine side of the discussion today. So make this
It's the big green button.
the big green one that's got the arrow that tells me to do. Okay. So what Cummins is sort of adopted is what we call Planet 2050, and that's to get that's a comprehensive plan through all our businesses, not just the engine side, but our plants and the things we do in the community and those sorts of things to get to zero carbon. Within that, we have a program basically called Destination Zero, and that's where the engines come. And so how do we move our engines and our technologies to zero carbon? And so as we look at this, we think about, well, what do our customers need to do their business? Because at the end of the day, we're a supplier, and we're a supplier of an engine that allows them to move goods and services. That's their business. So if they don't move goods and services, they don't have a business. So we have to provide technologies that allow them to do that. And our view is we need a suite or a portfolio of technologies. There's no one size fits all. So we're going to bring to market advanced diesel, natural gas, hydrogen, propane. You might even see gasoline, as well as fuel cells, battery electric, electrolyzers to support those fuel cells. So I mean, Cummins really is more of a technology company than an engine company anymore. I mean, we're developing all these support technologies to get carbon down, and yet still allow our customers to deliver the goods and services that they need to deliver. Okay. All right. How many folks have been down to the Cummins booth this week? Good. For those of you that haven't, please stop by. We've got a couple of really cool engines on display. We've got our fuel agnostic next generation platform, which will be designed to basically use the same block and infrastructure. But then on the top end, what we call the top end, so the valve train and the fuel delivery, can be whatever the customer needs it to be. Diesel, natural gas, hydrogen, combustion hydrogen, not fuel cell hydrogen, propane. But we're here in this session to talk about the natural gas product. And so this is our natural gas product line as it is today. So the first three, the 6.7, the 9, and the 12, are in production today and commercially available. This is really kind of the first opportunity that we've had to not go to a meeting and say, where is the 15 liter? I mean, everywhere I go, when are we going to get the 15? When are we going to get the 15? So there's a 15 liter down in the booth. So now the next question is, when can I get a 15 liter? So we're, Cummins is again a supplier, right? We don't build a truck, so we're working with our OEM partners to integrate the engine. Those of you that are in the air quality business have probably noticed that 2024 is just about upon us, and for California and California following states, there's just a small emission change going on. And so so we're trying to squeeze this integration work, basically put in a new platform engine into the OEM chassis in the middle of also trying to figure out how to deliver products to meet the 2024 standard. So it's been a challenge on the bandwidth piece, but we're actively engaged with the OEMs, and we're shooting for 2024. We'll have to see whether or not we can hit that. That's a very tight time frame to integrate a new engine into a chassis. Okay, so one of the benefits that we see, in addition to low cost fuel and low carbon fuel, is it's a very simple engine in the sense that we don't have the after treatment that we do on the diesel side. So diesel's got the diesel particulate filter and the selective catalytic reduction and EGR, and all of those need to work in harmony. And I think we've done a pretty decent job of doing that. But there are applications where you don't get enough heat, diesel applications where you don't get enough heat, and you have to do stationary regens. And I suspect our friends at the sanitation department got very familiar with stationary regens on the diesel product in their applications. And so we use I'll say a simple, I'm oversimplifying the simple, but we've got a simple three-way catalyst. So there's no filter, there's nothing to service. It's pretty lightweight, compared to a DPF or an SCR system. And so that's one of the advantages that fleets have really enjoyed is a maintenance-free after treatment. Okay, so let's talk about what I suspect most people want to talk about, which is the X15. If that isn't a sexy engine, I don't know what is. Because my wife, I'm a mechanical engineer by training. My wife thinks I'm super weird when I look at this stuff and go, man, look at that thing. But it is. It's a very cool product. We're super excited about bringing it to the market, and it will be a definite improvement over the 12 liter. So the value drivers here, reliability, which is across the board with Cummins products. Right? If it's not reliable and it doesn't, it's not out on the road, fleets aren't making money. Right? An airplane sitting at the gate is not making money. Trucks are the same way. Total cost of ownership. Right? If you can't make a business out of it, then you're not going to use it. It's just that simple. I remember this was years ago. Somebody from UPS said, as they were getting barraged with, well, why don't you do this and why don't you do that? Because they're the self-proclaimed rolling laboratory. They said, basically they said, we'll check all this stuff out, but at scale, we can't be the cleanest broke fleet in the business, right? It's got to work financially. So the cost operation is a big deal for us. We look at those sorts of things, and that's not just fuel, right? That's maintenance. That's uptime. That's the driver experience. I mean, in my opinion, part of the cost of operation is driver experience. If the drivers hate it, they will figure out how to make it not work, which costs fleets money, right? I'm hearing chuckles, right? Because anybody that runs a fleet knows that that's the truth. And then performance, right? Delivering performance that's needed to do the job. And the lineup today does a pretty darn good job at delivering good performance up to 80,000 pounds. Now, I'll admit that the 12 liter is on sort of the lower edge for an 80,000 pound application. The 15 will be a much better fit. 15 will also provide that driver feedback. I've noticed you are chuckling at this driver thing, so you must be a fleet. The driver experience, at least that driver experience piece, right? They want to, if they're getting out of a diesel engine, they want to experience they want to have the same experience with whatever technology they get in or better, right? And then all this supports our path to zero. Okay, so some of the the things that we see as improvements, just, you know, we're chasing all of these emission standards, right? We got 2024 in California and following states. Our friends at the EPA have released their proposal, which will drive down NOx. We don't know exactly, you know, where they'll land, but it will drive down NOx. And this engine will be designed to meet those standards. So we're excited about that. It also turns out that this engine, since it was a clean sheet design, and we have much better tools than we did previously when we designed the 12 liter specifically, basically computer-aided design, we have really been able to optimize where the block needs to be strong and where we can pull material out. And so the natural gas engine will actually be 500 pounds lighter than its diesel equivalent. So that's payload, right? That's money. And if you look at it just comparing to the 12 liter, it'll be 200 pounds lighter. We've also worked really hard. We're targeting 10% fuel economy improvement over the 12 liter. So if anybody's used the 12 liter, it doesn't have bad fuel economy, but we're trying to close that gap between the natural gas experience and the diesel experience. And then we're going to integrate it with our transmission partners. So Eaton, the Endurant transmission specifically, and then Allison. You'll still be able to get a manual, although manuals are, you know, we see less and less of those every year because of the driver experience. And then for those of you that are running Cummins product, you know we have just a whole suite of powertrain. We call it sort of tailoring. You know, there are lots of adjustments that we can make to really dial in the engine for the application. And then of course, as we've been talking about, you know, it's a carbon negative solution when you're using it with RNG. Okay, so speaking of the diesel-like performance, so this is the torque curve for the current 15-liter diesel and the torque curve for the natural gas version. I don't know how, I mean, the engineers have done an absolutely tremendous job, right, at matching that, and that will make that transition for the driver moving from their diesel truck into a natural gas truck really seamless, because that's one of the things that we do notice today or get feedback on is there's, I don't want to say a power deficiency, it's a different power experience. The torque curve on the 12 is different than the 15 or the diesel equivalent. And so they notice that. These drivers are professionals, right? They notice these things and we get feedback. And so, you know, we have to sort of, you know, in a lot of ways, retrain them to think about it differently. This removes that issue. Okay, so finally, this is my last slide, and then we'll get into questions. And for questions, we're going to use the app.
Yeah, I'm already getting them in.
Okay, excellent. So
Yep.
So use the ACT Expo app,
Yep.
right? And then we'll get into questions. But here's what's available today. Right, so there's probably a version of something that's not available in natural gas, but it's probably pretty darn specialized. I mean, you can get whatever you need today. The other thing I would encourage folks is if you're excited about the 15 liter and you're thinking, man, I want one of these things. Well, first, thank you. But second, don't wait to start the process of looking at natural gas into your fleet. There's a bunch of stuff that you need to do. It's not hard stuff, but it is different than diesel. So my line on this is our natural gas engines are exactly the same as our diesel engines, but totally different. right? And that was, you know, that's what we've sort of learned over time is we try to deploy these as sort of diesel-like experiences. And what we found was the details kind of tripped us up. Like the engine oil is different. Now we all know how to add engine oil, but if whoever's adding the oil on the shop floor grabs the wrong bottle, that's a big deal. Now we've got some really improved engine oils now available to us, including ones that can be used across platforms, diesel, natural gas, gasoline, propane, which has eliminated that, I'll say, misoiling issue. So we're trying to, sort of engineer out some of those experiences that we had early. The other thing we're doing is we're really working hard to get out in front of fleets when they take delivery of the trucks and go through the differences so that they understand why we're recommending what we recommend, and what the impact is if they don't follow the recommendations, basically. Okay, so that is my slide deck. So we are going to jump into questions, and I can already tell that this group has a ton of really good questions. You want me to hit this one more time?
Thank you, Tom. We can tell that you're dealing with politicians in your new role. It's a diesel-like experience, but totally different. That's great. Really, really exciting stuff. Really appreciate it. Got some great questions that have come in. You heard the term TCO. I mean, that's a really important piece. And I think one of the exciting things about natural gas is the fact that there's a TCO that's very attractive, especially now. We'll highlight more on that. So with that, I'm going to jump right into questions. If you don't have the app, if you could download it or just send them in through here, but I got quite a few and I'm just going to start rolling through those. Tom, you mentioned something that I think is really, really understated, and I did hear a response from the audience around driver acceptance. My daughter and I were driving on a road trip, and she said, I noticed all these, and she looks at all the trucks is that an Agility customer? Is that not an Agility customer? And she said, how come all their commercials are not really about what they do? They're about drivers, recruiting drivers. And I said, because there's a driver shortage. So one of the things that, I think gets overstated too is when we look at these technologies and we talk about TCO, we're really good at doing a comparison of truck to truck, EV truck to hydrogen truck to natural gas truck to diesel truck. But what we don't do is take a step back and look and say, if we really want to achieve mass adoption, number one, we have to have driver acceptance. Those drivers are very, very important to the fleets and to the business. Number two, if a fleet deploys a technology that has significantly less range, therefore they need more assets, guess what they need more of? That precious resource that they have a hard time getting now, which is drivers. So it doesn't necessarily get rolled into the TCO model, but it's certainly an important thing to keep on top of mind. So with that, I'm going to roll right into some of these questions. Got a question here in regards to the TCO advantages. Maybe Dave and Thomas, you can both kind of hit on this one. Given the TCO advantages of natural gas, are incentives even needed? And Dave, you're running a fleet right now, so obviously you're producing gas, but looking at the price of diesel today and how it's spiked up, but looking at the stability that typically natural gas has, when you look at deploying, and this is talking to a new adopting fleet, let's say, does it need to be incentivized, or is natural gas at the point now where it's sustainable?
Yeah, I think it's very close at that point where it is sustainable. I mean, obviously Thomas mentioned about fuel, and diesel is about 3 times the price of natural gas. That's kind of inflated at the moment. So simply that, you could potentially get away with that grant funding. But Carlton Rose did mention from UPS yesterday, we're all motivated to bring that total cost down. So, and the guys on the diesel side are also kind of improving efficiencies. There's still a lot of R&D going into the diesel side. So I think some of that technology still needs to improve. But the TCO is on par with diesel today. even without that grant funding. So it's not necessary, but it's good to have, and it really helps with that adoption, particularly with new fleets that are, maybe limited with capital. Some people more just concentrate on the capital side and don't focus on the TCO so much. So particularly in those cases, having those grant fundings on the front end to offset that higher capital is very important. But I think the other thing with TCO that I really want to mention is just, when you go with new technology, I think the real thing is to really make sure, one, you get driver acceptance, but two is in your shops that you're training your maintenance staff. We work very closely with Cummins when we put that 12-liter and 9-liter into our fleet. Some people say the maintenance cost is higher on CNG, and it really is if you don't have a proactive maintenance policy or process in your shops there. If you aren't doing those spark plugs at the right time or changing that fuel filter, you're going to have more damage to that engine, and it's going to be a lot more expensive in the long run. So a lot of people have been burnt by that, and a little bit shy still. But if you are proactive with your maintenance, you can really prove that TCO is less than than a diesel counterpart.
So the way we look at it is credits are going to accelerate adoption, right? I mean, that's pretty basic. If you're going to get paid, if you're going to get some off the top by credits, you're going to be more apt to buy something. But it's kind of a fallacy if this isn't going to last long term, right? Credits won't be here forever. The government won't continue to subsidize vehicles forever. So if you can't get to a point where this actually makes sense without credits, then are you heading down a logical path? Probably not. So the way we like to look at it is ultimately these new vehicles are going to be more expensive. You need to move to a lower cost fuel in order to offset that more expensive upfront cost. The real problem is if you're going to look at moving to a more expensive vehicle, and then you're also going to be looking at moving to a more expensive fuel, you never give yourself that opportunity to move down to a lower cost of operation. And that's when fleets are really looking at these alternative fuel solutions. That's what you need to take into account. What's the upfront cost? What's the fuel cost over the life of it? And does it get you to that cost parity or below diesel? I can tell you right now, hydrogen does not get you there unless it's subsidized. And then what we're seeing with electrification is most of the time it doesn't either, because a lot of times fleets are being charged peak charging rates for when they're buying their electricity. And that's far more expensive than diesel in many instances.
And maybe, Thomas, you could elaborate on the weld. We're getting a lot of questions on RNG and CNG and that whole weld-to-wheel conversation. I did show one just quick chart on California, but didn't elaborate on that whole weld-to-wheel calculation and why it's so important for RNG.
Yeah, so the way we look at it is it's basically like, hey, we can take pollution and use this to charge a battery pack as opposed to letting that pollution go off into the atmosphere. And ultimately, by going through that process, the emissions that are going to come out of that tailpipe of the vehicle are less than the emissions that would have been what would have just come out of the methane going into the environment. And that's what gets you to that net carbon negative or below zero emissions profile. You can use pollution to charge batteries to drive your vehicle. And that's what makes it a kind of win-win solution for RNG.
And we did get a question, and I'll take just a quick stab at this, because we just commissioned a third-party study on the availability of biomass in this marketplace in North America. Is there enough biomass that can be converted into RNG to support a RNG future in the vehicle space? And the answer is yes. Now, it's not all easy to get to, and we've accessed a very, very small slice of it, but the study showed that we can improve our RNG production by 70 times in this marketplace. So a lot of work is going into expanding RNG and in this particular market. And one of the comments that did come out too is CNG typically has a very stable history, from a pricing standpoint, versus a barrel of oil that can be extremely high like it is now, and that could be sustained for a period of time, or low. So it allows a fleet to have some stability and projections going forward. Okay.
I think there's been a lot of news coming out recently around the reported methane levels coming off of landfills, dairy farms, wastewater treatment plants. What was being reported is actually a lot less than what the reality is. There's been a lot of research being done on that recently. And even this kind of old data from a while back, I think it was using CARB numbers. If you captured all what was presumed RNG out there, it would be hundreds of thousands of vehicles every year could be run on 100% RNG.
Dave, a question for you. Is LA County Sanitation being used as an example for other municipalities around the country on how they can take biomass or wastewater and actually run their vehicle fleet. As you stated, you're carbon zero.
Yeah, I think I'll just piggyback a little bit on that last question with landfills, and I think a lot of that source testing is done periodically. So sometimes it's not during the worst period of when that gas is escaping from that facility, and I think there's a lot of science going behind landfill gas collection systems. You know, we were one of the first ones to pioneer gas collections in the 80s, I believe, well before my time in the industry, but. You know, and I think that process has really developed, and we're seeing companies like Waste Management really kind of expanding that. There's a lot of landfills that don't even try and capture that gas; it's still flared off. So the flaring process is better than letting that gas, escape into the atmosphere. But it's not doing anything useful. It's just wasting that energy, but stopping some of that emission. So there's a lot to be done on that side of things. And just to kind of piggyback on that, I think. We operate very large landfills and digesters because of the size of LA County here. But a lot of small municipalities maybe have smaller landfills or smaller digesters, and the cost to kind of put some of this infrastructure in there is maybe cost prohibitive sometimes. But maybe that's where funding comes in on this infrastructure side to help support the small to medium sized landfills or wastewater treatment plants to really capture this gas. And then, and capture it at a high percentage, and then convert that to, a resource like fuel for vehicles. So, I think part of that is a lot is education and training as well. It's like some of the smaller agencies maybe don't have the staff or the bandwidth to handle that. So, they should leverage, agencies like us that have that resource, that have done that. So, through education and training, we can kind of raise the tide up by pulling everyone around that and really kind of tap into some of these other sources that have never been used.
Great, thank you. Tom Swenson, Cummins, got a couple questions on the 15 liter. Regards to one of the compliments that we've seen in the nat gas space is how quiet the 12 liter is versus the 15 liter. In regards to the 15 liter diesel versus the 15 liter nat gas, do you expect the same sort of benefits
in terms of sound?
Yep.
Yeah. So we do, and part of that is the nature of the combustion. I'll give you a very quick story about one of the things that we learned around how quiet the engines are. When we were first deploying the engines, we had a number of customers come back into our shops, and they said there's this weird cycling ticking sound. And as we looked at it, it turned out it was the air compressor that they had never heard before over the diesel engine. So you're going to hear things that are normal, but that you've never heard before. And so again, coming back to the driver experience, they really like that because, I've seen drivers literally have earplugs in all the time because they don't, the diesel engines are noisy. Now they've gotten a lot quieter, but they're still relatively noisy. So yeah, I guess that's a long answer to say yes, we expect, similar noise performance with the 15.
Okay, so piggybacking on that then, you showed similar torque and power curves. What about range? So efficiency of the engine compared to diesel and maybe the 12 liter natural gas.
So this is always a tough one. Normally the question is, so what's my fuel economy going to be? And my classic answer is, well, it depends, because I don't know how you use your truck. So the way I like to answer it is on a duty cycle specific basis. So how you're using your diesel engine now, and how if you put that same duty cycle to natural gas with the current product line, it's somewhere around 15% decrease in efficiency. And there are some reasons for that. There's compression ratio, and we have a throttle, and there's some technical reasons for that we can't close that gap. Compression ignition engines are amazing, right? From a thermodynamic perspective, right? That you can get incredible efficiencies. We think we're going to close that gap, by sort of 10%. So we think we'll be in the 5 to 10% range, depending on application.
Okay, Thomas, a couple of questions for you. You mentioned that your product has a 75-mile electric range as EV by Carb. Is it approved by Carb?
So we're going through that process as we go into the launch of the Hypertruck ERX. The plan is to have it CARB, EPA, NHTSA certified. And ultimately, there are two different credits that we're going after with our vehicle. The first is the ACF and then also the ACT CARB credits. So ACT is on the OEMs. It's a mandate that the percentage of vehicles they ship into California need to be ZEV qualifying vehicles. We will hit that. We'll qualify for 75% of a ZEV credit. So that's a big win for the OEMs. And then right now, the ACF credit is currently in draft format, but we just put out yesterday in our earnings call how, as it's written today, Hyliion's Hypertruck solution will qualify for full credits under the ACF mandate for fleets.
Thank you. Okay. Another question for you, Thomas. Is the current Hypertruck ERX powertrain able to be modified in the future to run on hydrogen or DME?
So ultimately, that's kind of that roadmap of going to hydrogen-based future. As we move from an ICE natural gas engine to a fuel agnostic engine to a fuel cell, those would be, even though the powertrain is staying the same, it would be a new vehicle sale on each one of those. But the fuel agnostic one is where you can start with natural gas and then ultimately evolve into hydrogen when that hydrogen infrastructure is built out. So we see that as having a pretty unique differentiator in the industry because you're kind of given a fleet of vehicle that's future-proof from a fuel standpoint.
Great. Okay, a question for everybody, really. How would the panel advise quickly identifying truck routes in my fleet that are viable to change to natural gas? Is there a tool, service, and how should I accomplish this? Maybe start with you, Tom, down on the end.
Yeah, so my first advice would be reach out to your truck OEM and reach out to your Cummins rep. So one of the things that we're doing at Cummins, and this is not just for natural gas, but this is across all the fuels, is we're offering basically consultative selling, right? Sitting down with the fleet, understanding their operation, and looking at what you want to do and how you're using the trucks and trying to match the right technology into the right situation. And so in some cases, we may recommend diesel. And others, we'll say, yeah, the natural gas will fit. You've got some other resources as well. I mean, the natural gas fuel providers also have folks that can come and help. And so it really is a team lift, if you will. But I think your first starting point would either be your Cummins rep, your local Cummins rep, or your local truck OEM. And if your local truck OEM salesperson doesn't, have the background or experience, which is fine. I mean, it's not, not everybody has come up to speed on this stuff. It's all still emerging, even though we've been at it for 30 years-ish. Reach out to me, right? I'll get you connected with, one of our Cummins reps. So that would be my recommendation.
Thomas, any thoughts on your side?
Yeah, I think every fleet in the room should really be looking at their operations and breaking it down to figure out what solution makes the most sense for which bucket, right? Chances are you are going to have operations in your fleet that make sense for BEV plug-in. And then there's going to be ones that make sense for diesel, as Tom mentioned, and there's going to be ones that make sense for nat gas. And maybe what is there today isn't going to be what's kind of there in the future. As I mentioned earlier, there is an expectation that the range of BEV vehicles do get better over time. The other thing to keep in mind here is look at what's the life cycle of that vehicle going to be, because if your batteries degrade by 20, 30% range, well, maybe what worked in the beginning from a range standpoint and what route you were running isn't going to work towards the end of life of that vehicle. So there's a lot of factors to keep in mind. Ultimately, you have to start talking to the various suppliers in the industry, coming forward with different solutions and finding which ones are going to make sense for the different parts of your fleet. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution that's going to be, kind of what diesel is today. That's not what the future is going to look like.
Great. And Tom, we got a question on service network for the Hyliion product and demo trucks that you have in the field. Do you have any customer use case experiences, and how does Hyliion plan on servicing vehicles in the field?
Sure. So I'll first start off by just kind of the timeline progression we're on. So we are doing ride and drive events right now. We're doing them at the show here. So just out of curiosity, how many people in the room have driven in an electric vehicle? Electric commercial vehicle, I should qualify, not just car. Okay, so I would strongly advise, like, everyone in the room, go. There's tons of electric trucks here. Go drive in one. You'll immediately realize the difference from moving to a internal combustion driven engine or driven vehicle to an electric vehicle. It is game changer. So go do that. That would be my one challenge to everyone here: is go drive in one of these trucks. Ultimately, though, where we're at is we're doing ride and drives. We're getting fleet commitments already for the Hypertruck. We move into controlled fleet trials with these fleets later this year. That carries into 23. That gives us time to get that Carb, EPA, NHTSA cert, and we'll start production on the vehicle in the latter part of 23. So ultimately, that's the timeline we're on to bring this technology to market. In terms of service, our goal is to really piggyback on existing service networks that are already out there. As a company business model, like we're trying to stay capital light. We don't want to go put service centers all across the US. There are other companies who have already done that, and they've done a fantastic job at it. I think what you'll see with a lot of the electric providers is piggybacking on existing infrastructure, but needing to train up some of the technicians there on how to work with these vehicles. And the other thing I think we're going to see, which is a little different than diesel, maybe it evolves over time, is right now, if you pull a diesel truck into a service center and you have a problem, that technician is going to dive in and really find the root cause and fix it. That's not how electrification is going to start. Electrification is going to start by the software telling us what component, what box is having an issue, and then the technicians are going to replace that entire module, and then that module will go back to a location and be fixed, and then have it as a refurb part. Reason being is that we're technology that can be dangerous. Electric, high voltage electric can be dangerous, and we need to be smart about how technicians start interfacing with it. But the nice thing is that electrification components are very modularized, and you can just replace the one that has the problem. But we're going to see more nuts and bolts replacements as opposed to going in and actually fixing it.
Great, thank you. Dave, a question for you. For LA County Sanitation, what regulations are going to drive food waste generators to have their own on-site food waste slurry creation systems and pickup and transport relationships that will get the slurry to anaerobic digestion centers? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the state is really kind of mandating each city develop a plan to kind of divert, anything generated, any waste generated from that city itself. So the cities are kind of, scramble at the moment to figure out, how to get that diversion. So some cities would do their own collection, will have to figure it out themselves. But a lot of cities will franchise their collection out to, a company like Waste Management or Republic Services or someone like that. To do the collection. So a lot of those places have their own material recovery facilities, so they're looking to kind of gather that and collect it there. But then on the processing side, what do they do with that? Do they either compost it? And then it's pretty hard to get approval for composting facilities sometimes within regional areas. So, other option is there digesters available, or can you build new digesters? So everyone's this regulation just came in the first of the year, so everyone's kind of a little bit of a scramble to figure out the solutions. But there's estimated to be about 4,000 tons a day of this material just in LA County alone. So that's not even expanding out to the other areas. So there's a lot of this material, and we're still trying to figure out those solutions for that particular material.
Great. A few different questions, Tom. Maybe you could help on the regulatory side. Are there any federal incentives on the horizon or currently in place in California and across the country to help with RNG infrastructure or even vehicle purchases?
So this sort of ties back to what we were talking about. Is this a standalone technology, right? Have we reached that inflection point? And I will tell you that the state certainly has believed that we've reached that inflection point. And so, yes, there are some incentives still available, but they're weaning very quickly. It really is time to stand alone on an industry. We think it does. We think when you look at the total cost of ownership and the ownership experience, that it will stand on its own. Now, there may need to be some financing, maybe on the front end, right, to deal with the incremental cost, but it absolutely pays for itself back. When you look at the major fleets that are adopting it in large volumes, they are not using incentives. So they have figured out, now they're well capitalized, right? So that the upfront cost isn't nearly, the hit, but I think there are a number of financing options that are available, including from the fuel providers. Right, the fuel providers will basically cover the upfront cost, and then amortize it over years in the fuel cost, basically. So you pay a little more for fuel, but you don't have to pay the upfront cost. So if you're looking for incentives, you better go quick, I guess maybe is the message, because I believe starting probably as soon as next year, they'll I'll say it's a straight commercial transaction.
Question for Thomas. What are the main reasons fleets want Hyliion? Policy requirements, financial reasons, ESG? So when you're talking to fleets, what's really driving their motivation, specifically around today's diesel fleet looking to make that first step?
Yeah, so everything you just mentioned, but the top buckets for us comes down to cost of operations, emissions off the vehicle, and then, as mentioned throughout the presentation, big differentiator is leveraging that existing infrastructure. Other benefits as well, like when a fleet that's looking to move to electric, they see that the range of a BEV plug-in truck is 100, 150 miles versus they see a 1,000-mile range vehicle in the Hypertruck. That's a game changer, right? It's nearly 10x the range of the vehicle. And one of the big problems right now is range anxiety of electric trucks. So we eliminate that problem. And then ultimately cost is a huge thing, right? Fleets love new technology, but if it's going to cost way more than diesel, it's going to be a very tough sell unless they're extremely ESG motivated. So those are some of the big factors. And then the last one is going back to these carb mandates that are coming out. ACF, ACT, these are going to force the hands of the OEMs and the fleets to start adopting technology like ours.
Great, thank you. For Tom and Thomas, Tom, do you see any expected delays in the rollout with the OEMs for build slot availability on the 15-liter? I know you talked about 2024. Do you expect any delays in that? And then Thomas, for some of your applications, seeing that rolled out with either PACCAR, Freightliner, or Volvo products, same question to you. Maybe Tom first.
Yeah, that one is, I'll say, essentially impossible to answer. There are so many variables right now that are happening. I mean, not only just the integration piece, but we're chasing, and it's totally whack-a-mole, right? We're chasing parts availability across the industry, right? Just everything. And so all I can commit is, Cummins is actively, working to expedite it. Our OEM partners are doing the same. There's just so much going on and really so little bandwidth that's available that we got to work all this in. And so, we're going to do our darndest. The exact date, it's so hard to predict, but we're going to do our darndest to have it available in 24.
That's translation 2024. It's going to be ready. We see we're down to 3 minutes.
I'm surprised you didn't say like next year.
January 2024.
Yeah.
We got 3 minutes left, maybe 1 minute from each of you just to wrap up. Thomas?
Sure. So, to kind of conclude this. So electrification is happening. It is coming. I think if anyone's trying to say, no, this isn't going to happen, you're definitely in the minority. But the reality is it needs to be practical, right? I think when we were at ACT maybe 2 years ago, a year ago, or 3 years ago, maybe it was, people were just enamored where, oh yeah, electric's here, it's going to happen. And people hadn't really hit the hurdles or the problems of what electrification really is. I think the fleets that we've talked to at this show, they realize that, yeah, we need to move to electric, but it's not always easy. And we need to be really thoughtful on where and when and how we're going to be rolling these vehicles out. And that's where we see, combining natural gas with electrification is an extremely logical, extremely practical way of moving to electric and doing it today, not in a decade from now.
Great, thanks. Dave?
Yeah, I think the dynamics are changing. I mean, as we're switching to any alternative fuels, being electric, natural gas, hydrogen, we're all, as fleet users, we're all going to need more and more help there. And traditionally we went straight to the dealer to buy these trucks. They were well educated in the truck and they could give us all the information we needed to buy that truck. That dynamic's changing with new companies and bolt-on technologies like we're seeing here today. And I think all these suppliers, being the OEMs or the sub-suppliers to those OEMs, like Hexagon, Agility, Hyliion, Cummins, they've all got the tools and resources to really help educate us and give us that right information about where we should adopt first. So really kind of, if the deal is not helping you, they should be setting up those relationships and those conversations. But if they're not, don't be scared to go directly to these guys, these companies, and start asking them, for their help. And they can provide you tools to kind of analyze your fleet and see where you should start that fleet. But you should really start and look at where are your big fuel users, because that's going to come to that total cost of ownership savings of where you can kind of reduce your fuel first from not only a cost standpoint, but from a sustainability standpoint. So tackle those. Maybe they won't be good fits because of the range issues that some of these alternative fuels have, but start there as a starting point. Don't be scared to start and have those conversations, because companies like us, we've been doing this for 25 years. It's not new technology, but every fleet is a little unique. So start having those conversations.
So I guess I'm going to clean up here. So my advice would be, as you're starting to think about the next generation of trucks that you're looking at, don't pick a winner up front. Go in with an open mind, evaluate the technologies, in just a totally agnostic way. I mean, that I think is part of one of the challenges that we're having now, is people are trying to pick winners when we haven't even fully vetted the technologies. We got a lot of smart people working on this thing, and we got a lot of options. And so I think Thomas is right. I think we're going to see mixed fleets. We're going to be EV, natural gas, propane, fuel cells, all in the same fleets, because fleets have different routes and profiles and use cases. So go in with that open mind and really leverage your service providers, right? And get good information, to make those decisions. I gotta do this because I don't ever see my CEO, but our CEO is talking this afternoon. So please go to the keynote and listen to the Cummins Planet 50 story. So maybe that will get me my raise I've been asking for.
We'll make sure of it, Tom. Okay, with that, I want to thank my panel. Thank you for your input. Thank you for attending. If there's any fleets in here that have questions, please come up to the stage afterwards and we'll direct you in the right direction to get to the answers you need. So thank you very much.